Hi guys, so yes, Xeno Crisis has now come out for the Dreamcast. Now you may have seen I did an in-depth review of this game for the Mega Drive, and if I can work out how, I'll leave one of those little link things up there so you can check that out, which is a full review of the game. The Dreamcast version dropped and it is very much the same game, but with a few slight differences which I'll discuss, and some new controller options. So case wise, this is the PAL version. I believe they all came in dual cases, but this is like the PAL blue artwork, and there is a Japanese version and I believe a US version. But really nice packaging. The disc looks awesome. I love the artwork on the disc, which is really different in art style to the Mega Drive release. And then if you remove the disc, you get a little image of the guy, the male character in there, and then obviously you get the manual inlay there. But one of the reasons I'm really excited to play this on the Dreamcast is this, and that is that it has twin stick support. So we'll be using the twin stick controller to play a bit of Xeno Crisis, and also some various other controllers for the Dreamcast, and we'll find out which controllers work well and which aren't that great. So anyway, let's have a look at the game. So this is Xeno Crisis for the Dreamcast. As I said, I won't be doing an in-depth review here as I already did one for the Mega Drive, and as this is a port of that version, the gameplay is identical. If you haven't watched my Mega Drive review, I'm a big fan of the game and regard it as one of the Mega Drive's finest. The soundtrack by Savage Regime is also one of the best on the system, and it sounds even better on the CD-based Dreamcast. Sound effects are improved with some brilliant in-game speech. The intro sequence is now voiced, although for some reason the scenes between levels aren't.
Commander Darius, we have a code red distress signal from Outpost 88.
Xeno Crisis on the Dreamcast has everything that made its Mega Drive counterpart great. Fast-paced, frantic action, challenging gameplay, and an adrenaline-inducing soundtrack. Where the real difference lies is with the control scheme. On the Mega Drive you had the option of playing with a 3-button or 6-button pad, but either could be quite tricky to get the hang of. The Dreamcast has the advantage because of its button layout, and here's why. The analog stick or D-pad controls your character's movement. It's personal preference, but I prefer using the D-pad. The buttons on the right are used to shoot in any of the 4 directions, pressing 2 together to shoot diagonally. This is a huge advantage over either of the Mega Drive's layouts, as the buttons are actually arranged in the correct way. You don't have to think about it, pressing left shoots left. You then have the 2 shoulder buttons to throw grenades or to execute a roll maneuver, and you can choose which trigger does which in the settings. So it seems set up very well for the game, but of course there are other controllers to consider on the Dreamcast, so let's discuss 4 of them. Of course there's the stock Dreamcast controller. Pros are, as I just mentioned, the layout is ideal for Xeno Crisis, but of course it never was the most comfortable controller to use. Next we have the Dreamcast arcade stick controller. This is one of mine that's been modded with an arcade stick and buttons. This I found to be by far the worst for playing the game. The button layout isn't suited to the directional shooting at all, and even the movement felt more clunky using the stick. Then we have the Ascii Fight Pad FT. I'm lucky enough to own 2 of these, as I think they're the Dreamcast's best controller by far, but I appreciate that not everybody has one. This played brilliantly with Xeno Crisis and it felt the most natural and fluid. Perhaps that's because I'd already adjusted to the Mega Drive version with a 6-button pad, and the button layout is very similar. I would prefer it to have shoulder buttons for grenades and roll, as having them next to the directional shooting buttons is much trickier, but having the shoulder buttons as face buttons is the whole point of this controller. It was primarily designed with fighting games in mind. And lastly, the twin stick controller. I was super excited for Xeno Crisis to come to the Dreamcast so that I could play it with this controller. Although, as Bitmap Bureau have stated, it's not a twin stick shooter, it certainly seems like one. On this controller you use the left stick to move, the right stick to shoot, and the fire buttons for grenade and roll. You have 2 fire buttons on each stick, one on the top and one trigger, and either works, so it's up to you which you want to use. And again, you can swap the roll and grenade commands to either side depending on your preference. On paper this should be the best controller, as you don't have to think about the directional shooting at all. Simply move the right stick in the direction you wish to shoot. but strangely the game felt really difficult using this controller. Maybe I just need more practice with it. So in summary, I prefer using the Fight Pad FT, but you'll be pleased to hear that the original Dreamcast controller works brilliantly. Avoid the arcade stick, and if you have a twin stick then it may take some getting used to. Even though the twin stick felt difficult to use, it's a hell of a lot of fun. And seeing as very few games on the Dreamcast have twin stick support, this is probably one of the most enjoyable ways to use it. So there we go, Xeno Crisis on the Dreamcast is just as much of a triumph as it was on the Mega Drive, so I'd definitely recommend grabbing a copy if you own the console. Brilliantly fun and addictive, and at 30 quid it's cheaper too. Thanks for watching.